Hello, everybody, and welcome to V.A.C. Roundtable number 52. We took our problems to the United Nations. So, no summertime blues, as much as we saw lots of discussions on green and cannabis. It was rather an exciting um, week there in Vienna, and we had multiple of our members basically on the ground in Vienna, and a couple of them are here to give firsthand accounts. And I was kind of the recording guy in the United States on the back end of things. I was able to actually ask a question of the world body of which the Veterans Action Council had the most questions asked and accepted, and it was rather awesome all the way around. So, needless to say, it was a lot to take in because a lot happened, and we're going to start off with our mentor there at the United Nations, Mr. Michael Crowitz, to give us an understanding and give us his perspective on what he saw. Mr. Crowitz, welcome.
Thank you, Etienne. Yeah, it's so much in my brain. I feel like if I could just do one of those like mind melds from Star Trek, it'd be great. The I think you got to start at the beginning with this. So just let me give you like 2 minutes, a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Hopefully I can hit it and just kind of give everybody a primer on why exactly we're at the United Nations in the first place, working on cannabis policy. And the United States passed its Controlled Substances Act back in 1971. And according to the DEA, it was very much to implement our treaty obligations in a treaty that we signed in 1961. The treaty we signed in 1961 was the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. The Single Convention was expanded in 1971 and 1988. So there's actually 3 different treaties that make up our drug control system at the United Nations. And I always try to, lay as a baseline the understanding that this is not like, the United Nations that a lot of people complain about, the sort of one world order or whatever. This is not a delegation of authority to one country or one little group that's running the show for everybody. The 186 countries that signed these treaties, United States being a champion of the treaty back in the days of Harry Anslinger, when they passed this thing. The 186 countries delegate that authority to 53 countries, and those 53 countries take a hands-on role in running this show and updating the treaty, making changes to the treaty as needed on a yearly basis. And where they do that is this Commission on Narcotic Drugs. That's where we were. The Commission on Narcotic Drugs meets in Vienna, Austria at the United Nations. And to get in, you have to be invited by the UN because it's for countries. It's not for non-government organizations, but we're invited as observers and as interested parties and as experts in the field. The UN and the member states really do appreciate our input because oftentimes non-government organizations are working on issues much more close to the stakeholders, close to the people that actually have the need than the governments are. And they actually do appreciate that input. So having said all that, the treaty doesn't really interfere with what we're doing inside the United States. The laws that we pass inside the United States at the state level are protected by our Constitution, and that Constitution also invalidates any treaty considerations. States within the United States don't sign treaties. The country, the United States, signs the treaties. So at the United States, we will be addressing the treaty issues whenever we finally legalize at the national level, descheduling or in any other way that we're talking about legalizing cannabis at the national level. There will be an international component to that discussion. There has to be sort of on the other side of the looking glass after we legalize. There has to be a real reckoning on how we're going to handle ourselves, how we're going to portray the United States policy to the rest of the world. The geopolitics of that, I don't need to tell you how much this matters, and it's not just an insignificant thing, even though it doesn't again, stop us from changing the law or in any way hinder us from legalizing. But having said all that, here we are in Vienna, Austria, Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and this is the 66th CND. And I've never seen so much discussion of cannabis. Cannabis was rescheduled in the treaty to remove it from its most onerous sort of most dangerous drugs category. It used to be scheduled just like heroin in the treaty, just like it is in the US. And that's not the case anymore as of 2020. So that ripple is really hitting some big, sort of rocks and making some very interesting waves. I've got a piece here that I recorded, and I guess I'll go right into that if you want, Etienne. Okay, so the place that we're at, and I just want to set this up just a little bit to give you a little feeling for what it's like here at this level. I've worked now in 5 presidential administrations at the UN. Started in 1998. 1998 to 2008 was all about getting the badges, all about getting our non-governmental organizations in the door and really functioning well. And almost seamlessly, 2009 to 2020, we wound up working on reform, and we were able to work through the change in the World Health Organization and finally at the treaty level. Over the years in those 5 administrations, we never really had the United States government on our side, and the functionaries within the treaty body were never really on our side either. So there was many times when they were helping each other. In other words, they were saying bullshit in Vienna that was backing up the bullshit the United States was saying. And this is such a strange and different place that we're in now, because what I'm about to play for you is the United States standing up for our position, defending us, defending not just the cannabis movement, but really in a way defending cannabis liberty for the world. And the bad guys here are this International Narcotics Control Board. Over the years, they went after us on Prop 215 in California when we legalized medical marijuana. They went after us in the United States in their reports when we had vending machines that showed up in the dispensaries. Over the years, the International Narcotics Control Board, which has been called the watchdog group of the UN drugs control system, has barked at the United States and what's happening within the United States quite a bit. But the International Narcotics Control Board is a 13-member independent body. And up until recently, I called it a quasi-judicial body because that's what they call themselves. But our federal government has made the case that they're not a quasi-judicial body. And they came out with a report. I'm going to be writing an in-depth article, it looks like, on the report. But in short, they said straight up in the report that there was insufficient evidence from legalization to make any kind of real conclusions about what legalization is really doing inside the United States. And yet immediately thereafter, they made a bunch of really bad conclusions, really damning language, almost right out of the just say no period again. And this is not supported by the US federal government this time. And we don't have Nancy Reagan, pushing, cheering them on. This is really unfortunate that the International Narcotics Control Board decided to go there. I think they give up a lot of their prestige, frankly. They get to be the voice of the treaty if they get it right and they speak from the treaty, and that's a powerful voice. But if they go off and they say stupid stuff, then they're just 13 people with their expertise. And in the world that we're in, with hundreds of thousands of doctors across the world that are working in cannabis and cannabinoid science, that's not very impressive to me. So anyway, without any further ado, I'm going to play a minute or it's just a few minutes of the testimony. This is the first time that the UN drugs control program actually put on their server the video. They just never did it before. We had little snips of video that we had before, but that was about it. So this is very unusual for me to be able to do this. You'll be hearing, you'll see the chair of the commission handed off to the United States. And then right after that, the rapporteur, I think, says something that's interesting as well. So just a few minutes in total, if I can get this thing queued up here.
The first proposal from the Russian Federation relating to the INCB It seems that
acceptable to everyone. My question, is that the case? Is the first proposal, the first part of the proposal referring to the International Narcotics Control Board? United States has the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We are fine with language that applauds the work of the INCB, but we do not agree that the INCB has a role to monitor the compliance of member states. And that position is well known, and this is not the first time we've had this debate. It may be the first time we've had the debate here. Chair, it is our strong view that the report should reflect what was accurately said in the room, and there shouldn't be any inferences drawn from it. There should be no assumption that a conclusion that certain actions violate the treaties. But if some delegations actually said that, of course, that statement should be reflected in the report. But no assumption that the INCB, who was not present in the room, made a statement. That's not accurate. It shouldn't be part of our report. And we think, Chair, there is a way for us to bridge these views. Perhaps just a simple statement to the effect that member states express their appreciation for the work of the INCB, period, without going into any descriptors where we know that member states do not have agreement on what the INCB's specific mandate is. In our view, it is to assist member states in their efforts to achieve the aims of the convention, and our view is based on a reading of Article 9 of the single convention. Thank you, Chair.
My thanks to the United States of America for its statement. And I'll give the floor to the rapporteur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we're dealing here with what was said in the room on certain areas, but we're also talking about the mandate of the INCB. And again, I would ask delegations to look at paragraph 25 of the present document. In the last line of that, there's a formulation of language that reflects the debate that has just been expressed between one delegation's view that the INCB's role is to support and another delegation or group of delegations' views where the INCB's role is to supervise or monitor. So if the discussion on paragraph 23 can be read in conjunction with the last bit of paragraph 25, that might help delegations reach consensus. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There you go. A little taste of the United Nations 66th Commission on Narcotic Drugs.
So that kind of gives you an understanding of what our people were there visiting and monitoring. But a lot of things happened because there were different meetings on different days. There was different votes. Some drugs were actually added to lists, schedules 1 and 2. But there are also side events, and we were able to be part of a side event with our friends Myrtle in South Africa, and with Fields of Green for All, as well as Kenzie, Farid, and others that are part of our delegation were there and attending. I'd like to get an overview. Dr. Brian Adnoff joined us. And of course, this was one of his, I guess, your first time there. So give us your perspective. It had to be quite a whirlwind week for you. So thank you, Brian, for joining us tonight.
It was a whirlwind week. And my thank you again for Veterans Action Council, particularly Michael, for kind of telling me about this, encouraging me to go and showing me around and making it an interesting and fun experience and eye-opening. It was really awesome. I mean, I had no idea this world existed. What stood out for me was really the first few minutes of the week in the plenary sessions, where the chair and the executive director of the CND, in their opening comments, essentially said that the drug war that the UN has that the CND has overseen has cost trillions of dollars, resulted in the incarceration of perhaps hundreds of thousands or millions of people, caused enormous social and individual harm. And yet the drug supply every year continues to increase. And so clearly we need to take a different approach. And I was just blown away. I had not anticipated hearing this from the leaders of this commission. And that was a big message throughout. The Volker Turk, who is the High Commissioner of the UN Human Rights Commission, he was a virtual then, and he said quite clearly that substance misuse is a human rights issue, and we should decriminalize all drugs. So it was, again, not something I had been expecting to hear.
And during the side event, needless to say, that we heard various discussions from, the good, the bad, to some really disturbing information all the way around. But Michael, would you, well, let's see, Nate has rejoined us. So Councilmember Landau, this is also your first time to Vienna, and you got to get a firsthand view. Can you give us some of your observations from your week in Vienna?
Yeah, it was my first time. It was quite an honor to represent the Veterans Action Council there. I would say I wasn't sure where cannabis would be, and Michael informed me that usually there's one side event, and there was 14 side events regarding cannabis. Most of them very friendly, although we still have a lot of work to do because there's a ton of misinformation out there. I was at one side event where they said that all the cannabis in dispensaries, cannabis flower has mold in it, which is just not true. But when people want to cherry pick false information to paint the picture, they'll choose whatever they want. But that gives me a lot of hope because that's showing that the opposition has no real facts or data anymore, and they have to go and falsify and skew information. Gives me a lot of hope that although we have a lot of work to do, that we're on the winning side of the battle. And it was just so great to see so many people from around the world. And the same thing what Brian says is that yes, you'll have Russia and China and Singapore still being very anti-drugs, but I think the international consensus is that we failed. The way Michael said, there's no such thing as war on drugs. There's war on drug users, and those are human beings, and people should not go to prison for that. We should dig deep and find out why they're using drugs and try to help and fix that than just punishing them. So I'm very hopeful for the future, and that's my initial synapse.
Well, needless to say, I felt yeah, it was quite confounding, of course, to see Kevin Sabet still be allowed to go around and spread his lies and misinformation. But it was also quite poignant to see our people doing our best to quell that as best as possible by attending his events as well as the other side events to catch and call out people regarding the specifics. Councilmember Byrne.
Maybe this is for all three, Brian, Mike, Nate. I would like you to tell us what, can I use the word legal? Countries like Portugal, Uruguay, who have, quote, legalized all drugs, should they make reports? And were the reports positive, neutral, or negative, in your opinions? I don't know who wants to answer that.
There was a report, there was a side event. I know it had Canada and I believe Portugal I don't know if Mexico or South Africa, but it was several different countries reporting, and it was very positive. All reported, I don't remember the specifics, but it had a very, all is good, this is working well, and we don't have any major significant problems. And I think it was very well received as well. I don't know if you were there, Michael or Nate.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'll say about that. First of all, directly answering your question, Al, the decriminalization and legalization of drugs that are part of harm reduction generally, it seems, looking back over the last 10 years, it seems that the harm reduction aspect of it did actually stick. Like the UN gets it now. They're not even afraid to use the words harm reduction. Like it used to be they would talk about like harm reduction principles, but they wouldn't use the actual politically loaded term harm reduction. And that's specifically because if you use the words harm reduction, that implies that you buy into a non-judgmental approach of meeting the drug user where they're at with their needs. That's not the drug war usually. Non-judgmental isn't their strong suit. So, for them to actually use the words harm reduction today means that they really are actually, even them, the drug warriors, trying to implement harm reduction, even if it means, kind of rolling back that harsh tone. But as far as the countries presenting their information, it's very interesting contrast. I was just thinking about it a few years back. There was Kevin Sabet and his project Smart, or Sam, whatever he wants to call it, did a presentation on Colorado, and they cherry picked data, came up with all kinds of assertions that were didn't sound right to me at all. And the next day, a Colorado official was at a side event and was able to correct all that. Well, this was at a next level. This was totally at the next level, because here we have Kevin Sabet saying a bunch of junk, and we have 5 different countries answering back with their data, hard data. And there was Canada, Uruguay, Colombia, and the Netherlands that made very strong presentations. The Netherlands is doing a research project, so they don't have anything to say right now about legalization, but they're willing to scold the INCB for making conjecture before the research is done. They have this great position to take. Well, we're doing the research, don't say that there's a bunch of conclusions to be made before the research is done, right? So Canada and Uruguay almost said the same things, refuting almost word for word everything that Kevin Sabet was saying. The sky, not only did the sky not fall, but it was actually maybe better than most of us would have imagined. People switching away from smoking, not a problem with youth, not emergency rooms, filling up with children or whatever. And to have these countries be able to refute that directly is quite amazing. The one thing I'll point out though, is that they're very quiet. I mean, these countries don't have like a website dedicated to this information specifically. It's on their websites. We asked, in the question and answer period, have asked how to find this information and what we can do. And it's actually pretty cryptic to get the country's position from all these different countries. The side event that we attended was so unprecedented. And if we can somehow take that side event ourselves and take some of the information and put it out there as a council, that would be very much, I think, useful out in the world.
Councilmember Landau.
Now to your question, the vice president of Bolivia had a presentation on coca leaves. He showed that they've been using it for hundreds, if not thousands of years for traditional use. And the year that they outlawed it, the amount of coca leaves going to cocaine shot through the ceiling. And then the same year that they legalized coca leaves again, it dropped by 60% in 1 year. And now 90% of coca leaves in Bolivia are used for traditional use and not for cocaine. So that's a clear indication that the war on drugs did not help at all. It never curtailed use. If anything, it either plateaued or went up by outlawing it.
And we saw, pushback, of course, by the United States as, Michael has stated, which was something we were surprised, but excited to see. Councilmember Byrne.
Yeah, well, thanks, guys. And I knew you were going to say that. That's why I asked the question. I think it's very important for veterans and those in the United States to understand that these countries, if you will, are an experiment. And the experiment's doing really well everywhere it's being experimented well. So that what the states in this country are doing is experimenting, and it's going really well. All right, so now I want to change the subject again a little bit. I'm sorry, and this might be for ETN, but I had a problem with a word that was being used by the United Nations in a meeting that I'd never heard before, and I believe the word, if I remember it correctly, was diversion. And I thought when I heard the definition of diversion, I thought, well, hey, this is pretty positive. Going along with what Michael just said about harm reduction, how that used to be verboten to say that. Now it's part of the vernacular. So tell us about one of you guys, and I think it's ETN. How about diversion?
Well, it's not diversion. Diversion is what it was previous. The new word is deflection. So deflection is
Thank you.
Yeah, that is a new terminology, and that is actually being experimented with currently in Great Britain, as well as in the state of Illinois. It is actually a test case. So diversion is what was used in the UK system, and there was a side event presentation that was done by a UK officer, and she spoke how she would arrest an addict because if they had drugs on them, they had no other choice. So that they realized that they were humiliating the addict by arrest, putting them in cuffs, putting them into a van, then strip searched upon arrival at the station, and watch them get arrested, turned around, go back on the street, and then they'd catch their eye on the street, and they would have nothing to do but to arrest them again and go through the same rigmarole. And they realized that having the police involved was a problem. And it was a problem because no trust was able to build. So they wanted to put it into the public's hands before the police. So it's about, from their perspective, treating humans as human beings, deflect them into drug counseling and into help, not using coercion or fear, which of course has been the main situation. And due to the humiliation, the trust erodes, and they feel that basically the trust of the people is part of the community, and they are the police, and the police are the community. But they don't need to involve incarceration and putting people in jail specifically. So it was a fascinating outlook and an outlier in the sense of looking toward real world solutions that are taking place now, because as we know, between opioids and of course the fentanyl and the fake drugs that are out there that are spiking, tons of illicit market and illicit drugs are touching on things at a rate that it's killing people at high rates here, not only here in the United States but around the world. And the need for sound education as well as real world help was something that was too important for them not to talk about. And I'm glad to see not only is it happening in the world, but it's also happening in the United States. So I would also defer to the state of Illinois, since they are apparently the test program for the United States regarding this. And I hope other states would take that over further. So Al, that was the one, and I saw that as a side event, and I did record it, and we can watch it together at some point to also hear. It's a fascinating breakdown. I've recorded a lot of the side events. Unfortunately, there's sometimes 5 to 6 to 8 side events at the same time. So it was impossible to record every single one, although I did my best to sign up. And there is access points for the videos and side events on the United Nations website, etc. But it was very fascinating to see various presentations. I saw one specifically in the United States regarding the Office of National Drug Control Policy. Nataki McMurray was the speaker. She spoke on the 4 different initiatives regarding the ONDCP, the DOJ, the DEA, and the State Department, which are the receivers of the 4 different initiatives, which they get the money from the federal government to necessarily fund. Over 700 coalitions have been funded or grantees, and they're basically driven by youth movement and development. The one from the DOJ is called was the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. They have an opioid youth initiative. The DEA has an initiative between the 18 to 25-year-olds speaking on opioids, as does the State Department. They're funded, let's see, drug-free communities, been funded since 97. At the local levels, 12 different coalitions. So there's still a lot of well-funded information and misinformation out there. And some of our drug people could start actually applying for some of these grants and permits, especially those that are getting into research. Most are community oriented, and I would be interested to see a full breakdown of them all. Council Member Adnoff, you're recognized.
I wanted to follow up with what you were saying with just the feel from both the commissions and most of the countries that they were looking at harm reduction efforts and not at supply interdiction. I went to a couple talks on supply interdiction where it was really the focus, but one was by Uzbekistan that was talking about a drug-free society they were working on. I asked the chair of it later, is she including alcohol and tobacco in that? And of course they are not. But they are a country that's very far to the right. Well, it's a dictatorship, and that's where you were hearing about the old approach. But in general, you were hearing a much more progressive perspective, at least in the side events and the things that I was focusing on.
Well, thank you, Dr. Adnoff. And we have been joined by a special guest and friend of the drug policy world movement. David Borden has joined us, and he, of course, actually held one of the side events that I recorded at the 66 CND. So, David, could you give your takeaways from your week? We heard from Michael and Nate and Dr. Adnoff, but would love to get your take, because you have been working internationally on this level for a while, and to get your perspective, I think would give us all a different perspective.
Thanks, Etienne, and I saw you on the Zoom portion of our meeting in person, and this was a Friday afternoon, which traditionally anyway has been a slow time at the CND, but we had around 12 people from the CND attending, and another 12 or so members of the local Filipino community, some of whom have met one of the speakers we had there before. So we had well over 20 people in the room on a Friday afternoon, and that was really nice to have. As you know, that we our main focus at the UN since 2017 has been on human rights situations particularly extrajudicial killings in the Philippine drug war. And we had speakers, a Filipino well-known priest who's now based in Rome. And we had a Bangladeshi advocate who's based out of Hong Kong and who had organized successfully an effort to secure U.S. sanctions over extrajudicial killings, including in the drug war against leaders of that country's Rapid Action Battalion, which is a brutal organization. That was my Friday, and of course there was a lot of other things going on at the CND. It was there were interesting differences. There were fewer resolutions from countries, and a couple of the reasons I've heard for why that might be is there's a continuing and perhaps growing disjuncture regarding drug policy between different countries. There's not a consensus. In Vienna, things traditionally get done by consensus. The other reason I heard is that European governments did not want to give Russia a lot of opportunity to talk and advocate its goals with the resolutions, and that they didn't, and so there weren't as many resolutions allowed for that reason. So that was different. There was an inspiring speech by the head of the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, the commissioner, and that it certainly seemed to hint at the idea that legalization might be a human rights approach. Though he didn't state that outright, came pretty close. I argued that. I had the chance to intervene on the Wednesday plenary session discussion topic, implementation of the drug conventions. And I argued what we have been for a bunch of years now, that, and which I believe last I heard is the position of Uruguay, was the position they took when they enacted legalization, which is that human rights is takes precedence under the UN Charter over drug control if the two are in conflict. And there's a demonstrated tension between human rights and drug control, and that was mainly what I talked about. There were certainly a lot of people back, and there were more than 100 side events and people in the rooms. All of us breathing each other's air, and hopefully that's okay at this point.
I thought it was a excellent presentation. I'm sorry that not more people saw it, but I thank you for definitely bringing attention to the extrajudiciary killings that are still ongoing. One of the reasons why we are working towards the goal of 2029 for cannabis is to remove cannabis for adult use from the most dangerous drug categories, so that people could at least stop being executed potentially for cannabis around the world, much less for the other drugs that we know people are still dying from the synthetics, from the manufactured, etc. What is Michael? What is the difference between the New York, Vienna, and Geneva from a cannabis movement perspective?
Yeah, before we get into that, I wanted to belabor the side events just a little bit more. The especially the one thing that really stands out for me, there was a piece of evidence, if you will, that was presented by an emergency room doctor that Kevin Sabet put forward in his side event. First of all, his side event was titled "How Cannabis Causes Opiate Overdose Death." And basically what he was making the connection from was the COVID charts. I mean, he showed increases in death from opiate overdose and how it lined up perfectly with legalization. And it was funny because one of the presenters actually even said, "Well, look at that. Doesn't it look a lot like the COVID curve?" Sort of just noting the similarity. And I was like, no, that is the COVID curve. It's not a cannabis caused curve. That's a COVID caused curve. So, but anyway, that's the kind of stuff that they do. And the one piece that really jumped out at me and Nate was this emergency room doctor put up a package from some gummy bears that was supposedly bought from the legal regulated market of cannabis products. This California logo on it, and this little tiny baby got really, really sick from eating them. And of course, the Canadian data that we had just heard, the predominant problems that they were having from emergency room visits were not from legal cannabis products. They were from illegal cannabis products. And sure enough, from 15 feet away, this little package up on the screen, both Nate and I both could see that was not a legal product from California. There was nothing about that would have passed muster in California's program. That was a counterfeit product. And it lined up perfectly with what was being presented by Canada and Uruguay, that this is not the problem of legal regulated cannabis. This is the problem of the outlier of the illegal that we haven't stamped out yet with enough regulated cannabis. And think about this. I mean, they're putting that up there and making the case that we need to stop legalization because it hurts little children. Look, but in fact, what they're doing is creating more prohibition, more illegal products. That is where the problems were coming from. Therefore, more problems. It's more than just frustrating. It's maddening because as a parent, as a adult, as a veteran, as a lot of things, I want to really do good. I want to create a space for children to be able to go to school and learn and not run into trouble with drugs, probably as much or more than Kevin Sabet does. And we're actually doing that. We're working on regulation. We're working on legalization in the many states and around the world to do just that, to be responsible and to create programs that protect public safety and public health. They're not helping us. They're not being helpful. And I think that is worth pointing out, and emphasizing. The Kevin Sabet is going to be having a conference here coming up on 4/20. We're not going to be able to attend it because we're doing things on 4/20. But his mentor, this guy from CADFI, Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America for Youth, he actually put together a medical marijuana panel that was fair. He brought in Jazz Pharmaceuticals, who now owns GW Pharma and the Sativex and Epidiolex and all. And he brought in one of their lead researchers, and it was a fair side event on medical marijuana designed to create a good discussion. I applaud him for that effort. And if he can try to bring us together with Kevin Sabet and get Kevin Sabet and his team to be helpful instead of annoying and not helpful, I think that would be very useful for us and for the world, because what he does is actually creates the very problems that he's trying to solve. So anyway, you wanted to talk about a little bit, Wade had brought this up before, what exactly the dynamic is between New York and Vienna and Geneva and where our work lies. Before I get into that, let's go ahead and clear out any comments. David and Al, I think both have something to say. I'll hold that thought until they get done.
David.
Mine could wait till after Michael's. There's something I observed on the linked to the use of opioids for pain. Should I talk about that now or come back to that?
You're welcome to. Go ahead.
Well, one of the stated purposes of the drug conventions is to make substances available as medicine. And, we have this opioid crisis, and we're over 100,000 overdoses a year, not all of them from opioids, but most of them. We also have historically a problem of undertreatment of pain or non-treatment of pain. Because some patients need the opioids. Some patients can use other medicines, some can't. There is a program at the UN, and they talk about it, devote a lot of discussion time to it every year, helping countries throughout the world where the opioids are largely unavailable to make them available medically. It's such a travesty that in most of the world you can't get these even if you need them. So there was a side event I didn't get to go to, organized by the UNODC. One of the speakers was the head of an organization, Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing, and they advocate critically against pharmaceutical industry for over promotion of the substances, which and he argued that other countries, as they move these actively into their pharmacopoeia, need to be aware of our mistakes and try to avoid them. And those are valid points. I agree with that generally, but well, I happened to see his intervention on item 5 was a couple of speaking slots before mine, and I was disappointed. I was hoping, I want to hear what a careful expert from that camp says about how to do this. I'd heard a number of claims that are not accurate according to what academics have to say about this, or other information I've seen. He claimed that long-term prescribing of opioids for pain is not effective, that the idea that it would be is wrong. I looked online for academic discussions, and I found some. What they said is the evidence on that is not conclusive. So not conclusive and it doesn't work for that are two different concepts. Certainly there are patients who believe they need these opioids long-term to have any kind of life. He dismissed the idea of obstacles to obtaining pain treatment as a myth promulgated by the pharmaceutical corporations. I've known so many patients who've been in that situation. That's anecdotal, but one entity that believes that's an issue for some patients is the CDC. Several years ago, they published a memo, guidance on how to do opioid prescribing for pain. 3 years later, they put out a memo saying their guidance had been misinterpreted, and they listed 6 different ways in which it had led to inappropriate withdrawing of prescriptions or inappropriate reductions or denials of prescriptions. And none of them being things one would expect would only just have started then and not to be happening anymore now since they put the memo out. Nothing seems more natural to me than in the system where we're trying to keep these drugs away from people, except get them to the people who need them. and to prescribe for them. Medicine being so complicated, nothing seems more to be expected than that both overprescribing and underprescribing would happen at the same time to different people and to different degrees, depending on what the climate is and the practices and the knowledge and whatever else is going on at that time. It just it makes me really sad, and it made me sad at that time to see this real problem that we fought for decades just have its very existence denied. Valid points that pharmaceutical promotion has played a role in some bad opioid prescribing and contributed to some problems. Valid point that these countries, other countries starting to do this, should try to learn from that. But I want some solid information and solid interpretation on these issues, and not everyone who's advocating on them, who should be able to provide that, is necessarily doing so in an objective way. And this was at the UN sponsored in part by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime that's charged with helping countries make these substances available. That I don't want to see that project get damaged. So that's something that bothered me at the time. Not a criticism of the UN, and not a total dismissal of this doctor or his organization's work, but I was not left viewing them as the go-to people for, the detailed understanding that we need of this.
Well, thank you for that, David. Councilmember Byrne, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, a couple of both. David, I'll just say this in general. What you bring up, of course, is a real problem and it's scary. But over the years, decades, I've never heard a vet ever say to me, Al, I started using cannabis and took on more opioids. Never. It was always the other way around. Now, I know that's anecdotal, It's N-1 bullshit, but it's thousands of them, and you know it and I know it. So you're on the right track, and do not give that up. It's very important. And by the way, we're trying to one of your later points, the V.A.C. hopes, we don't know what the hell we're doing, but we hope to get information from the VA based on our Freedom of Information Act request to find out answers to those questions. They've seen tens of thousands, millions of vets have visited in the last 12 years who have used cannabis somehow in the medical protocol. And what we're saying to them, David, is what the hell happened? And what we're hoping to see is that the medical folks will have written down, this guy was on a lot of drugs and now he's not, or greatly reduced, et cetera, et cetera. So we're kind of after that kind of information. And if we get it, we'll certainly call you up right away. No problem there. But my not a question, a comment again on this fellow, Sabet. I'm not sure our audience knows who the hell we're talking about. I first ran into Kevin Sabet. He was a PhD and he worked for the White House. And the White House, this was back in the late 90s, they were sending him out to do the same thing he's doing that Mike and these guys are describing he's doing right now. Only this was in DC, and I got invited to do 5 years in a row. I debated Kevin Sabet, not face to face. The professor wouldn't let me do that. He probably had my Vietnam veteran image and kept me apart by a week. But anyways, a bunch of college students, Sabet went in, did his thing. I went in, did his thing. And the college students voted for me on Maryland Matthews. The point is that what I heard in those debates in the late 90s is exactly the kind of shit that these guys are describing that Sabet's laying out there in Vienna. To me, it's incredible that they're still saying the same bullshit. So anyway, the other thing, ETN, if you would announce, because I can't remember the proper title, but the V.A.C. has decided that this guy's language is so vacuous, empty, hollow, that we are going to present his followers with an award. Could you name that award, ETN, that we're going to present, please? Thank you.
Yes, that is the Passion for Ignorance and Unenlightenment Award, aka the Kevin Sabet Trophy, also known as the PU. Our inaugural recipient, of course, is Representative Pete Sessions, but of course others are following behind, and we have to accelerate those, needless to say. Councilmember Adnoff, go ahead.
I just want to add that prior to Kevin Sabet's second side event, Amy King had, I guess last year or sometime in the past, Kevin had testified in Canada, and the Canadian group had responded to his testimony saying that basically you're full of shit and here's where you were wrong over and over and over again. And Amy made multiple copies of this letter and left it on all the tables where people were coming to listen to Kevin, so they would be able to look and see who they were listening to.
Yes, there was quite a few interesting side events, and one I was also very happy to see you in, which was one by these prohibitionist researchers, Shane Varco from the Center for Social and Early Emotional Development out of Deakin University, just throwing out the quackery en masse. And as I was sitting there pulling my eyelashes out, watching this at like 3 a.m. Fortunately, I heard the first question and the first pipe off came from Dr. Adnoff. So, Brian, I could have been happier that you were there. And of course, Amy followed up. I would like to get your, you sat through a presentation. That presentation, when I recorded it, there was a 20-minute presentation with more graphs and pictures than you could comprehend in a moment, much less as fast as the speaker went through. However, we on the outside could not hear the recording of the tripe and misinformation they were peddling. Of course, they did stress out, we hope this information, we're wrong about this. However, this is what the data shows us, with really mostly graphs and pictures, but really no science to back it up. So being a doctor who relies on data and information and sitting there and watching firsthand a side event such as this, I'm wondering your thoughts, because I was surprised by how calm your demeanor was, because I was absolutely livid hearing the, not only the tripe we heard in the 80s of lies and misinformation about cannabis, but then, they upped it to whole other biological levels, saying how cannabis was having these types of birth defects, which there was really nothing but a whole bunch of horrific pictures to really back that up, no real data. So can you walk us through your mindset as you watched that, and then leading to your first question, Dr. Adnoff?
Yeah, I had a whole panel, so almost an hour, to figure out what I was going to say and to calm myself down enough to do it. I mean, the first 10 minutes was a video of a reefer, literally something quite that you could see in Reefer Madness. It was completely off topic. The next one was going to present data, but did not. It was summary slide. And I disagree that they didn't present any data that was supporting their case. It's just that they were presented so many slides so quickly that there was no way to tell if there was actual usable data there. I mean, I've sat through hundreds of presentations in scientific setting, and I've never seen anything like it. It was if this guy had never presented before and had no idea how to get his point across. So I just what I did was express my disappointment that I came there to learn something based on the title of genetics and cannabis, and I didn't learn anything. There was no data presented that helped me interpret what they were trying to say. And they said I could ask for the slides and get a copy, and I have no desire to spend more time on it. I mean, I gave them an hour of my life that I'll never get back, and I was glad I could say something. But it was I'm concerned that there is something there, and they're not able to, but they were not able to get it across, and they had an hour to do so. And I'm glad I came across as calm, because it wasn't feeling that way.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, your presence was greatly appreciated. Let's go back to Michael there, to that question I had from you, if you want to kind of go in that direction finally.
Before that, what was it that you were going to say about the resolution on indigenous communities? Brian?
Oh, I just I thought at the end Kenzie had commented that there was a lot of discussion at the end about a resolution about having to do with indigenous communities, and I never was able to find out what it was.
Okay, well, we'll have to put a pin in that and get back to it next
Okay.
time.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear about Vienna versus New York versus Geneva.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to describe this is just sort of the organic way that I hit these things in my activism. So starting out in New York, I was trying to get the badges to get NGOs like our cannabis organizations into the door. I really had sort of a dream of a timeline way beyond us. In other words, I would get them in, and the organizations would learn the ropes, and then someday, way in the near distant future, the movement would be in a position to actually change the law and do something with those badges. But to get the badges, that's what you do in New York. The Economic and Social Council of the UN is who you interact with to actually get the invitations to participate in the UN functions, including the commission and any other functions at the UN. But you actually interact with the head of the UN in New York. The commission, I would have, back in 1998, I would have said the commission was pretty irrelevant to me at that time. There wasn't much of a chance of working on any reform at that moment. I probably would have, maybe, I don't know, I probably would have been right. But it certainly became relevant in 2009. As I was saying, what I didn't say was what started it. It was actually a seed resolution that Azerbaijan joined together with Japan and put together a resolution to try to outlaw cannabis seeds. They were pissed off about Mark Emery selling seeds on the internet and their kids buying them and growing them in their college dorm rooms. It was pretty amazing testimony. But anyway, that was the moment where we started working on cannabis policy, there inside the UN. There's a lot of work left to be done in Vienna on cannabis policy. Most of it is around medicinal access. What they really chiefly do in Vienna is medicinal and scientific access, and basically creating a tight environment for the use of substances in that work, so that they aren't diverted from the pharmaceutical sector out into the public domain. That is their job. It's not their job to tell countries what to do or how to handle drugs other than that. Within those confines, it's an agreement that these countries have signed into. What first brought me to Geneva was our work on cannabis appellations out in California. And that brought me to the World Intellectual Property Organization over in Geneva. That's still a little bit out in our future. but we will be eventually working with entities like that, working on treaties and agreements that protect intellectual property. So think about it like this. If you are in Jamaica and you buy a cannabis product that says made in California, like I was just describing a minute ago, you know, the gummy bears or something like that, you want it to actually be from California. You want that to be protected, and you know, those trademarks and copyrights and all these different patents and things like that observed and respected, and to be applied to our cannabis, you know, right down to Mon Pa growing some particularly fantastic cannabis in Indonesia or California or wherever. And then more recently, we had the meeting over there, the UNCTAD, the UN Council on Trade and Development, talking about hemp. And hemp, of course, has always been considered to be excluded from the treaty. It's specifically listed as an example of an exempt commodity in the treaty. There's absolutely no reason why the provisions that apply to hemp should not be able to be applied to what we're calling adult rec, or adult regulated cannabis access. This is something that's been a little bit more of a revolution of thought inside of our movement than Kenzie and I would have thought when Kenzie kind of released this to the public about a year ago. But his assessment of the treaty is very, very sensible and very straightforward. And the treaty does not list cannabis based on a THC value or whatever. It's listed in the treaty based on use, based on purpose. And very clearly, cannabis that is used for horticultural or industrial use is exempt. There's a whole bunch of things that apply to that as to how countries would need to handle whether it's flower or extract. There's different forms to fill out. There's different provisions in the treaty that call for what has to be interpreted as very strong harm reduction, drug prevention, abuse, treatment, availability, things like that. Common sense things that they should be doing already, they have to be doing if they want to legalize, essentially, is what the argument we're making. And once we effectively make this argument, we pull cannabis that's not for scientific and industrial use out of Vienna, then it lands squarely in Geneva. And the trade, the intellectual property, all winds up in Geneva. So there you have it. You're still going to have the drug war in Vienna, which is pointed at cannabis generally, making it onerous, in terms of, I think the biggest thing that they're having trouble with is how to deal with cannabis as a plant material, as a produce item. They're on a pharma model, and we've got a Whole Foods product. So we got to figure out how to deal with that. But that's something that they were going to have to manage, because medicinal cannabis is going to be maintained in the treaty. That's not something that's going to change that I can see in the foreseeable future. How the drug war itself, how the treaty handles the diversion of drugs and this whack-a-mole going after these new scientifically created, bath salts or whatever dangerous substances every year, they're going to face a reckoning. And we figure it's going to be sometime in the next 10 years. We're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals 2029, 2030 timeline as a moment of reflection, where the treaty is going to really look at these drug laws as we've been enforcing them and shake its head with disbelief like we do. I think it's a natural conclusion to reach that we've seen with like our law enforcement counterparts in LEAP and others that have reached that conclusion on their own. The governments will reach that conclusion and are already reaching that conclusion, as you heard from folks who heard on the margins. The chair of the CND, the head of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, the head of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, they're all already speaking from our talking points. So how long that takes, the lag between that and change, that's going to be a while. And going back to 2020, one thing we learned is the treaty will need to be rewritten to really effectively remove cannabis from the onerous spotlight of international drug control. And that rewriting of the treaty is not a small thing. So we'll see when we can embark on that.
Well, we're hoping for 2029. We'll see what happens. Councilmember Byrne, your hand's up.
Just a little story. It's Al. Mike was talking about back in the late 90s signing up different organizations for the UN, which he did do. I think it was a couple of dozen, and he did a good job. David Borden, who I guess has left. No, David's still here. I think he might have been signed up at that time. Anyway, I was running an organization called Patients at a Time, and Mike wanted us to sign up. And one of the questions was, what's your relationship to the United States government? And my one-word answer was adversarial, which Michael laughed at the time and told me that that was so different from everybody else's who have been, oh, we're cooperating and we're good guys and we want to get along kind of. So we were adversarial. And what I meant by that was, and it still occurs, and this goes to Brian's comment, that there's a difference between what Patients at a Time did and what the United Nations did. Patients at a Time brought accreditation to the forum. The speakers were accredited. Guys like Sabet are in a forum when it's bullshit. A certain amount of all the, well, Michael talks about the treaty and the regulation. That's because he's one of the straight guys. But not everybody that goes there isn't full of bullshit. So back 30 years ago, when I said adversarial, I believe that we needed to be adversarial in the sense that the bullshit can only be countered with science. And that's what we brought to the discussion back then. And now it's everywhere. Thank you. And that was a good thing to do. But now I see that that V.A.C. has, we're beyond adversarial. I see now we're allied with these people. They're beginning to trust us. We presented ourselves well. The veterans who we represent are behind us. So I think this whole issue has been amazingly transformed in 30 years. And I just wanted to point that out. I never want you guys to get discouraged, like, oh, shit, this didn't happen. Dave's disappointed, rightfully so. But don't let that stop you. We're way ahead, man. And so this is a pep talk, okay? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the pep talk, but just seeing Kevin Sabet's smiling ass face is more of a motivation for a lot of us to continue going, and to see the lies and misinformation being debunked shows us the need for us to be there, and the reasons why we bring a doctor with us and others, because we are trying to use and keep real data to make decisions. So I'll go to Michael Crowitz, and I'll go to the questions that we asked the world body. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, before I go to my comment on what David was saying before about the pain medicine docs, David writes, we applied at the time for accreditation at the UN as part of Michael's project, but the UN lost our application. And then he wound up putting an application in again in 2014 and got final accreditation in 2016. So I didn't realize that. David is one of my mentors, really got me started with using the internet in activism way back then, right? And for him to have been part of my project, I didn't even remember that. But I worked with 26 organizations. So that was working with the organization and the leadership of the organization to get them ready to work at the UN. I had to sort of work with both. And out of 26, I think we had 11 successful applications, accredited organizations. So it was a great project. I worked on that again I started it officially when I met with Jack Hare and those guys in 1997. And then the first kickoff was 1998 at the UN meetings in New York. But the thing I want to say, David, I am equally disappointed with those doctors for sensible opiate, because I really had hoped that they wouldn't be like Kevin Sabet or whatever. And it seems like maybe they're not like Kevin Sabet. Maybe that would be unfair. But if they're not, evidence-based, like Nate, quoted me, which I thought was a great quote. I forgot I said it. Evidence-based is not the same as based on evidence. There's a big difference between the two. And the evidence-based is what we are and what the law should be. The evidence, what they were saying, basically, to me, from what you're reporting, David, I would say that that's received as, oh, that's the Americans, that's the United States. We're an outlier. We're such an outlier. And that sounds so different. All these other countries, that experience of the big pharma, is the evil boogeyman that's poisoning our kids with opiates. It doesn't work that way in other countries. And that sounds very United States-ish. And I hope it's just filtered out as just garble to the member states. But if we see that pop up, we need to definitely respond to that, because as I said, sort of as a joke, but very seriously, that's a false narrative based on a true story. Because yeah, it's very true that there was doctors that overprescribed, but it's not true that the doctors that prescribed drugs led directly to the overdose deaths. The missing part of that chain is where they cut these people off, led them to the street, and they wound up on fentanyl. Oh, they leave that part out. So, but anyway, yeah, thank you so much for everybody that worked on this and went over to Vienna. This is, I think, a very powerful year. And from what Etienne's about to say, that you can see we had a big impact.
Yeah. Once again, we got a chance to submit questions, and we submitted 4 questions, and we got all 4 of them answered. Including Michael. Michael had his own. He submitted under the Virginians, I do believe. Virginians Against Drug Violence. Michael asked, it has been stated by member states during the CND meetings that the death penalty for drug use, possession, or distribution conflicts with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Charter, and the spirit of the Drug Control Conventions. How can these principles be better applied and adopted in the CND for drug control? And how do they respond, Michael?
Well, he seemed to really love that question. That was the perfect softball question for him. And he went in a little bit deeper than he went into earlier, about their efforts and their cooperation, coordination. It's been said by him there and elsewhere that the death penalty is reserved for very, very specific things that cannot be achieved by just drug possession or drug distribution. It's the actual threshold for which the use of the death penalty would be, but what would you say, legitimate? It just doesn't apply in this field.
And I got to actually ask right after I happened to be on a brief vacation for 5 days and got stuck on a plane on a tarmac for 5 hours, made it home literally just in time to log in. And Michael and Nate are like, you're up, you're good. You want to ask a question? Your question's coming up. I'm like, oh shit, oh fuck, oh shit. And yeah. So my question was to the WHO: is how was the discovery of the endogenous cannabinoid system in the late 1990s affect your work, given that it serves a critical modulating function in all mammals? Well, they acknowledged the endocannabinoid system, which was refreshing and wonderful. Not only that, he stated that cannabis seemed, from their perspective, to be benign within that. So it's not toxic, which we all know, but it was nice to hear that verbiage coming back to me from the WHO. And then we had another question, which we had George all ready for. We had him all set, but unfortunately, the question got answered right before, and it was internationally, Hemp is defined differently by law, is considered important in international trade, and is exempt from the treaty control. Modern scientific processes have increased interest in cannabinoids derived from hemp, such as CBD. Do these products fall under treaty control, or are they responsible the responsibility of industrial stakeholders? And basically, a previous question kind of went to that. Basically, they stated that it's an extract, so therefore it falls under the convention. So thank you very much. Thanks for playing. Have a nice day. And then Nate also, not only did Nate get to ask a question, Nate was wearing one of our Veterans Action Council garrison caps and had, I guess, they needed a representative from the United States, and his hat said California. So, Nate, can you kind of tell us, give us your story about what happened there? Nate, are you there?
Yeah, it was like on a drug monitoring.
Well, go ahead, Michael. Hopefully Nate will come
Yeah,
back.
I think it's funny.
Sorry, I'm back. Sorry, it took me a second to get off mute. It was a bonus question. I guess Michael and I went to the event because America was officially sponsoring the CYPE event, and we were looking around the room and we couldn't see anybody from the U.S. And then the guy just walks up to me, looks at my hat. He's like, "Are you American?" And I'm like, "Yes." He's like, "All right, well, you're representing the U.S." So Michael got really quickly on his feet, and we came up with the question, and it was a really great panel and really eye-opening. There was people from New Zealand, Switzerland, Portugal, the Netherlands, I forget one other country, where in New Zealand, it's official law now because they have a lot of festivals, and there's a bad batch of Molly that put dozens of teenagers in the hospital. So what they do is, without anyone getting in trouble, they take their drugs that they're using and test it for them. And they're showing that 60% of users that see that their dealer lied to them, they will not go back to their dealer. So I got to ask them about what kind of programs do we have in the US, and representing the V.A.C, saying that unfortunately our veteran suicide rate is really high. And that question led to 10 people approaching me after, and in the coming weeks, I'm going to be in communication with them that there are some programs in the US, but they have to be, unfortunately, very on the DL.
On the down low, for those who don't know, on the DL. So there you go.
So
Well,
Nat, you want to wear the hat for us and show us some visual here to see what attracted them?
Nate doesn't, I don't think Nate has his hat with him where he is.
If you give me 2 minutes, I'll actually be by my hat and I'll do a little show and tell.
All right. So
Excellent.
While we're waiting, if you don't mind, while we're waiting, I wanted to comment on one thing you had talked about before, Etienne.
go ahead.
I thought the answer from the World Health Organization was wonderful. I mean, very rarely do we go into these things and ask a question that we just really would like the answer to. It's not a political game or anything. We're just really curious, like what they think, how they would answer it. And we were really, fearing, like thinking of you, Al, fearing that they'd say, "Oh, what's the cannabinoid receptor system?" Well, we had to look it up. Or no. He said that it guided their work by the understanding of the cannabinoid receptor system. He said it guided their work. And think about it. Every year they've got more cannabinoids that they have to look at. And I can assure you they do this. They look at the drug, they look at to see if it's dangerous or not. And then they look to see if anybody's using it. And they really do a pretty good search to see if anybody's using it anywhere in the world or talking about it anywhere in the world. And if they are, they try to tune them in and figure out what they're saying and learn from them. Otherwise, it's just a novel new substance and they'll try to figure it out themselves. And most of them are stuff that are hideously scary, drugs, as far as the ones that we've actually looked at. And the cannabis movement, the drug policy reform movement, generally hasn't pitched a fit on any of these substances that go into control. They haven't recognized any of these names of any of these substances. Kenzie and I were thinking, I don't remember even who came up with the idea first, but it would be a really interesting thing to have every year, everybody gets high on one of the drugs that they're going to outlaw that year. But then I thought, you know, they are all hideously strong drugs. So I don't know. There's Nate. He's back.
No wonder.
Looking
Yeah.
badass.
All right, here you go.
The crowd.
Nate, unmute yourself, or here, let me pin you for a second. There you go. So there you go. There's the V.A.C.
That's
Garrison
good.
cap. So him being seen wearing
Well-
that apparently got him all kinds of love as well as attention. Do you want to speak toward that for a sec there, Nate?
Yeah, so first of all, only one person out of the 2,500 people that were there got the 710. I was stuck on an escalator with someone, and the guy kept on looking and looking, and finally he's like, "Ah, nice one." But no one else. If it was 420, I'm sure more people get it, but no one really got the 710. But besides a few Arab people that were wearing a headscarf, no one else was wearing anything on their head. So it was just, as the days were going by, it was getting noticed more and more. And people were like, they're like, "What is that?" They kind of got it was military, but they couldn't understand it. And I think I was approached by 7 different ambassadors, and it was just a very good starter. There was a 3-star general. Michael knows his information. And when I talked to him, he's like, "Oh, every time I saw you walking with the hat," he's like, "When is he going to walk in with the vest? You know, if someone's wearing a garrison cap, it's a veteran, he's going to wear the vest one day." So yeah, this was a very good thing. And I will, anytime I lobby anywhere from now on, I'm going to wear this hat.
There you go. Sometimes it's dressing for the part matters and gets you the attention. And different people from World Bodies came up to Nate all during the time, just kind of just checking out on him in the hat. What you got there, Al?
Well, just like the Marine Corps now, we got our own poster boy.
All right. Well, Dr. Adnoff is going to have to head off here. Doctor, do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to share about your time in Vienna?
No, just that it was awesome. Looking forward to going back again. And again, thank you guys for pulling me into this. It was quite an experience and really just changed. Yeah, my work has been primarily in the United States, in fact, completely. So this was a real broadening of my perspective.
Well, thank you for taking the chance with us and going there and using your expertise. It was very helpful, and we're very appreciative, and we look forward to our times together in the future. So thank you,
Thank
Brian.
you.
Have a great
Thank you.
weekend to you.
You too. Bye.
All right, Michael Krawitz, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to, before we leave, I wanted to cover one last thing, the Vienna and the New York NGO committees. What I was thinking of actually was this reception that we attended. Nate and I got to attend. I don't think, David, I don't think you got over there. This is at the mayor's palace in Vienna. We went in the room, the very room where the Vienna city council meets. And it was just grand. I mean, to say it was grand would be a complete understatement. I was telling people the woodworking on the ceiling is like nicer than any piece of furniture that I own at home. You know, it's like, and that's on the ceiling, right? But the Vienna NGO committee and the New York NGO committee, as the name implies, are committees that are around non-governmental organizations that help them interact with the UN, with the governments of the UN. And without the NGO committees, it would be actually really, really hard as an individual NGO to navigate the system, maybe impossible. When I came in 1998, the Lions Club was very instrumental in helping us in New York. And because the New York NGO committee had kind of gone the way of the dodo, one of my projects was to bring the New York NGO committee back to life, which we did. So we have a New York NGO committee and a Vienna NGO committee. They were both like really active, probably most active around the last treaty, around like 1988. You know, you can expect that both, you know, the NGO committees were really active. But anyway, each one of them have different relationships. One, New York has a better relationship with the Secretary General in New York, and the Congo, which is the Committee on NGOs within the UN itself. The Vienna NGO committee has a better relationship with the UN Drugs Control Program and the UN Drugs Office. So between the two, you can see they're both assets for us to, you know, basically engage the UN through both of them. We're members through both of them, through me, Vienna with Virginians Against Drug Violence, and New York through Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. Nate has put himself in a volunteer status as part of the what do you call it, the nomination committee for the Vienna NGO committee. So he'll be actually in the mix of picking NGOs leaders to be part of the leadership in our next election, which there'll be a special election, I think, coming up soon as the board figures out what to do. So you'll be getting a call pretty soon, probably already on that job, because they need to fill out the vice chair now that the vice chair has become the chair. But anyway, New York especially is kind of drug policy reform leaning, and Vienna is, I'd say, slightly more drug policy hardcore, you know, abstinence or prohibitionist leaning. And both of them are good places for us to put energy and interesting places for us to get information and to participate in events at the UN. But especially in New York, I think we can actually have an impact on by participating at the level of bringing in new membership and getting involved in the day-to-day operations of the committee, especially coming up to this midterm, what they call a midterm review, which is next year starting a period of assessment of the drug control, which you can hear already on the margins. There's a lot challenging the mainstream thinking these days, emerging a new consensus, I guess you'd have to say, starting to at least.
Well, there was kind of a deep primer for you if you're interested about what's happening with cannabis at the United Nations. We also, this isn't our first video. If you go back, our number 14, V.A.C, goes to United Nations. Number 28, V.A.C, goes to UN with Nazli Maqsood. And of course, this one's number 52 because, yeah, we're busy. We're going to keep doing it because the need is there. We see the likes of Kevin Sabet and other prohibitionists out there that we need to be there to physically use information and knowledge to combat them. And it is still very much needed. And I cannot thank David Borden for his years of leadership there. Needless to say, thank you very much. And of course, our mentor, who is, of course, Michael Krawitz, who has guided us, Tony. And of course, Nate was there in person. George and I were watching from afar and did what we could while we could. And yeah, it's a learning experience. And next year, I hope to physically be in Vienna and ask my question in person. And I'll definitely have my cap on, except I'll bring my United States one for sure. That way they'll know. But thank you, everybody. This has been a very informative discussion. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at veteransactioncouncil@gmail.com. Thank you, David Borden, for joining us. Al Byrne, Nate Landau, George Armstrong, Tony Landry, Michael Krawitz, Wade Laughter was on as well. And I can't thank y'all enough for, and Dr. David Adanoff, of course, for being there in person as well. This has been our V.A.C Roundtable number 52. We took our problems to the United Nations. We'll see y'all in 2 weeks for V.A.C Roundtable number 53. Have a great rest of your night.